just as a matter of your intuition and knowing from past sessions that in the diagram on the front, the right side is part of sharing, giving and contributing, and the left side is part of holding within and contracting. Where do you think jealousy and envy fall? On the right side or the left side?
Left.
Almost intuitively you tend to say left. And let's talk about this. Why? Why is jealousy and envy more this than that?
It's about me.
It's about me. In other words, when a person is aware of their jealousy, envy, they recognize it's got to do more with them. But aren't they jealous and envious of the other?
Yeah, but it's for me.
In other words, the other one is for me, okay?
It's insecurity.
It's insecurity underlying it. True. Just take a seat. There are notes on the table. Just help yourself.
It's also envy.
Envy. Same for envy, you're saying. Envy, same as jealousy.
It is envy. Jealousy is actually envy.
What's the difference between jealousy and envy? Anybody?
Severity?
It's a fine line.
One's more severe than the other?
Yes.
Which one's the more severe?
Jealous.
Any other propositions as to the difference between jealousy and envy?
I think when you're envious, you're openly honest about it and you recognize what they have and you're saying how wonderful it is, and so you're envious of that.
Any other
I
thoughts?
think jealousy may be more personal, envy more
More general?
I think envy, there's less chance of a negative reaction coming from you. If you're jealous, you can be very negative towards people.
The difference is probably the history of the words and the roots they come from, and how we use them might be a little different, but they're really very, very much the same. They still have to do with self-orientation, insecurity, and what does jealousy or envy try to fill? What does it try to attain?
Something they haven't at all.
That's what its object is. You're envious or jealous of something that someone else has and you haven't got.
Improvement of thyself.
It doesn't make any sense to be jealous or envious. I mean, ask yourself, you've got a beautiful red cape on. If I'm jealous of that cape, so what does that achieve for me? I'm asking whether jealousy or envy is a matter of conscious intention, or is it something that we have no control over? That's the deeper question underlying. Think about that. Is jealousy something that we have conscious control over? Or is it something that is part of our personality and we have no control over it?
I'd say we have reasonably little control over it.
So on the spectrum of control, you're at the 10% mark, okay? Do I have any takers for 20 or 30 or 70 or 80?
That we have no personality is incompatible with control over one's emotions.
You don't have any?
Are you suggesting that?
I'm not suggesting anything yet.
You did.
I'm asking you.
No, you did. You said that, is it something we have any control over, or is it part of our personality? So
Yes.
you're implicitly saying that we do not, our personality, we don't have control over our emotions.
Okay, if that's what I was saying, then I withdraw it. Okay? Okay? I take it back if that's what I was saying.
Well, I
All right? I just want to know whether it's something that you're born with as a tendency or something that you acquire and have more control over. I'm asking just the basic question.
You're brought up with.
You're brought, so it's modelling, so it's something you acquire then?
Yes.
Acquire?
And then you can rethink it.
Are there people with more jealous personalities?
Definitely.
Yes, definitely.
So,
Yeah, but is it nature or is it nurture?
I'm asking,
I believe it's nurture.
and some people believe it's nature.
I think it's probably
Probably both.
You are not born a jealous baby. You know, you slowly, when you much older.
No, you don't as a baby say, I want the other one's milk. You do. Right?
That's very, that's very true.
Okay? All right.
They do get jealous of
Anyone in the room has any rationale for justifying states of jealousy or anger or envy? Anyone in the room finds some possibility where it's a good thing to be or express?
Well, if it motivates you to achieve
Well,
the same as what you are envious
True.
of, then yes.
absolutely. But then Hitler was highly motivated to achieve also. So motivation can't alone be a value statement of good or bad. It's what it in fact is intended. If the ultimate is good or bad. Just because it motivates is insufficient.
Okay, then it's if the subject of the
So I'm asking.
Object of the envy is a good thing. Then
So you're
it's-
creating a situation, but I want to ask people whether the flow of jealousy or envy can ever be justified.
Can
As-
inspire you to,
That's what the lady said. It can motivate you, can inspire you.
No, I don't think it can be justified because it's not a good emotion.
All right. So I'm raising these questions because people generally don't ask these questions. We observe these things, but we don't think about them. Now, if you recognize it within you as a consequence of this discussion, and I imagine that many of us have on occasion felt envious in our 25 years of life so far, whatever is the case, etc. Is that something that you'd like to not have felt or get rid of in the current set of circumstances? These are the questions I want you to consider. In Judaism, it's not a favourable trait to be envious or jealous. And towards the end of the session, we'll explain why, and we'll see if you can join us in that consideration. So it belongs to the left side of the diagram, not to the right side of the diagram, which is where we took off this discussion. And it's because, as was correctly pointed out, it's self-oriented. I want it, so it's always coming inwards, and therefore that's the left side, and chesed is always flowing outwards. Okay, so now that we've just skirted around the issue a little bit, let's look at point 2. We've looked at that, jealousy and envy, are they the same? As Gore Vidal said very, very incisively, when a friend succeeds, a little part of me dies. Is that true for you? When someone around you makes a few extra dollars by being lucky, there's a little part of you say, I wish it were me. Just introspect. Do you agree with the following statement? Envy occurs when we lack a desired attribute enjoyed by another.
Definitely.
Jealousy, that's a distinguishing envy and jealousy. Jealousy occurs when something we already possess, usually a special relationship, is threatened by a third person. That has been one way that some have postulated. I don't think by any stretch of imagination that's exclusively correct. It just is an interesting way of using the two, but they can be interchangeable in my opinion. But if you do use that distinction, envy is a two-person situation, where jealousy is a three-person situation. It starts to get complicated when you use this definition, isn't it? Envy is a reaction to lacking something. Jealousy is a reaction to the threat of losing something. I've just raised these because these are some of the thoughts that have been raised by third parties in context of this discussion. I don't necessarily myself agree with these. I think they're fairly artificial statements as such. But you can use them in a very specific way. Okay, now let's have a look at ourselves. 7 indicators. How jealous or envious am I? Go through those, 1 to 7, and see if you can identify yourself there. Do I sometimes get satisfaction from putting people down? I don't want you to reveal yourself. These are rhetorical questions. Just ask yourself. Would I feel relieved if a colleague didn't get promoted? even though I might like my colleague. Do I often think others are better off than me? Do I resent people who seem to have more than me? Do I feel diminished by someone's beauty, brains, or accomplishment? Am I afraid of people trying to outdo me? Do I see my spouses or friends as rivals for my attention or affection? So be safe and don't apply it to you, but apply it to people that you know. Would you say that you have met people who have one of these 7 traits? So the Baal Shem Tov said that when you see a fault in someone else, it means you have it as well. So have you just admitted to something?
That was a good trick.
He said you can't recognize a fault unless there's even the most minutest element of that within you. Otherwise you wouldn't. That's what naivety contradicts. And naivety, or we say ignorance is bliss, naivety is of that kind of stuff. In other words, you don't have it, so you don't see it in others. When you see it in others, there's a little bit of that is within you, which of course is very, very normal. No one's going to be considered abnormal if they admit to not admit to these particular 7 traits. Okay, but I think it's important to look at ourselves. So if we don't think that envy and jealousy is a particularly good trait, by and large, let's ask ourselves, and someone's already offered one opinion, where does it come from? What part of me does it derive from?
Feeling inadequate.
A feeling of inadequacy? A sense of inadequacy? Is that where jealousy comes from? Keep working at it.
The ego
Again?
comes from the ego.
Comes from ego?
The grass is greater than the sun.
Yes.
Low self-esteem.
But I want to know the basic inner core where it derives from.
Competition.
And why do you fear the competition, or why do you feel inadequate in the face of the competition? Still, we can go dig deeper and deeper.
Low self-esteem.
Low self-esteem is the common denominator. Would you ever feel envy or jealousy if you had totally adequate self-esteem? Think about that. If you possessed complete self-esteem, you have to ask yourself, what does that mean? Would you feel jealous or envious? Then let's ask, what is self-esteem?
The basic belief in the self.
Basic belief in the self. Could that not become egotistic?
Well, not to the point of a grand...
So what's the difference? I'm just asking us to hone in so we can actually locate it. Let's refine what self-esteem is.
Self-worth.
That's a synonym. What's self-worth? Egolessness. That's a nice Buddhist term. But what does it mean? Happy with yourself?
Confidence.
Confidence? What does it mean? I'm sorry for being difficult. What does it mean to feel confident?
Secure.
Secure? Do you agree with me that these are big words? Can we break these down to simple notions? Faith is a very big word.
How about happy?
Happy? Happiness cuts across it, but is part of it perhaps.
Would it be satisfaction?
Satisfaction.
It's kind of acceptance of,
Self-acceptance.
yeah, who you are, where your life is, what yeah.
Warts and all. Again, in the Jewish spiritual teachings, self-esteem derives from a very, very simple proposition, and that is that your soul has been reincarnated in exactly the right setting for it to carry out its mission of this journey.
So if you don't have good self-esteem, does that mean someone's soul is not?
It means you don't recognize why you're here and what you could be doing here.
Lack of awareness?
It's a lack of awareness of your journey. If you begin with the axiomatic proposition that you are here because you've been sent here for a given purpose which only you can achieve, and you've been provided with the wherewithal for that particular journey, then you possess self-esteem. Think about that. It's a totally different perception of what self-esteem is. So when we say the Modeh Ani each morning, that affirmative statement, and get to the phrase Shechechazarta binishmati, Shechazarta binishmasi, you have restored to me my own identity, my own soul. You brought me from the subconsciousness of sleep state, where my neshama has been beyond my body, back into my body, and you thank Hashem for making you you, then you're making an affirmation of your self-esteem. So when you say that affirmation each morning, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, 365 days a year, for 120 years, you should get it. And you should, by the end of the journey, have self-esteem.
How would you say if somebody was a murderer, for example?
Yes.
How would you be able to say that that was their purpose in their journey?
No, you can't. Absolutely.
So how would you deal with it?
How would you, well,
How would you deal with it?
with the person in terms of trying to assist the person, you're saying?
No, how could you say if somebody had done something very negative like a murder,
Yes.
how could you say that that was their purpose?
It isn't their purpose.
So how do you identify what actually is the purpose?
At the moment, I'm not talking about, your point is a good one, but I'm not identifying the purpose. I'm saying that you wake up in the morning knowing that you possess a purpose. But even more basic than that, because that's already complicating it when you speak about purpose, you wake up knowing that you've been reincarnated for a purpose that relates to your giftedness.
To your giftedness?
Your uniqueness and giftedness. No one else in this room is like you. No one else in this world is like you. No one else who ever lived is like you. And no one who ever will live is like you. You are unique in all of history. There will never be a second you. It'll be the same soul that's reincarnated, but it'll be placed in a different physiological body with different parents. And therefore, under those circumstances, it's got a different obstacle course to be able to express itself. So it won't be you again.
So shouldn't that alone rid you of all the need for envy and jealousy?
Absolutely should. The question is why it doesn't.
So does the soul, when it's reincarnated, have the same personality each time?
No.
Can you be completely
No,
different?
because let's ask ourselves, what is personality? Is personality already the way it manifests? Yes. And in that case, the way it manifests is how it navigates this new body, this new physiology, this new set of parents, this new formative childhood development. And therefore, if you say all that is part of personality, then it's very different. The essence is the same. So, for example, once a person dies, the person recognizes itself again as it was in a previous lifetime because it was that soul.
Would the purpose be the same of that soul, reincarnation?
No. The way we learn it is that there is an ongoing journey of the neshama, of the soul, and in each lifetime an opportunity is given to further that journey or to carry out what it couldn't do so in the previous lifetime, not because of a lack of capacity, but it wasn't intended to, and therefore it wasn't given that particular relationship of mind and emotion, that particular set of parents, etc., etc., had a different purpose and mission. So if self-esteem is the solution, and we're looking at what is self-esteem, and we go back to a point that was raised earlier, what is the difference between self-esteem and ego? The way we use it in the English language, at least. Can you tell me the difference between the two?
Self-esteem is like being full of yourself and knowing what you're worth. And,
Yeah.
ego is thinking that you're better than everyone else and that.
So the way you've defined it, both are not particularly good.
So maybe ego is worse.
Ego's a little bit worse than the other
self,
one.
yeah.
Okay, the way we want to use it in this class and in conventional discussion, we generally define self-esteem as positive and ego as negative. But that's only a convention. You can choose to define differently. Self-esteem is a recognition that you have a mission and that you have the ability to carry it out. Ego is a sense of me and I dominating over anything else. Okay? That's the way we're using the terminology here. And therefore they're very, very different. And what we want to practice is what we call in Chassidus bitul hayesh, ego abnegation. We want to dissolve the egotistic self. I'm not using ego in the psychological term, more in the conventional term. Egotism means I have to fill myself up because I feel so inadequate, so I have to keep filling myself more and more, and I have to consider myself more and more important because really I feel very, very empty within. So I put on a good show, even to the point of convincing myself, and a person becomes an egotist and described as such, whereas self-esteem is a recognition that you have enough to do what you need to do. And therefore, how does that relate then to envy and jealousy? If you have enough to do what you need to do, I don't need yours. Because yours is different. If I have yours, it wouldn't work for me. If I were to be a millionaire like you are, it may not work for me at all. If I have the boat and the Rolls Royce, it may not work for me at all. I am given and I have access to what I need. Now, it's a simplification because then the question arises, is there any ambition that is justifiable or good or valuable? I won't go there at this moment. But at the moment, we're just drawing the distinction there. Now, if you have low self-esteem...
I was just wondering if you're referring to the absence of desire in the second of the Buddha's Four Noble Truths.
Desire...
And the extinction of desire, and attainment of a higher state, which is ultimately one of egolessness.
Yeah, we certainly don't subscribe to that at all. We see ratzon, wanting, as a very, very definitive and positive feature of humanity. So, for example, if I don't feel that I have yet risen to my potential and I want, desire to reach that potential, that's a very good drive in our tradition. The word is ratzon. So once again, let's just go through the motivation theory. At the very top of what we seek in life is a phenomenon known as oneg. Oneg means pleasure, the pleasure principle. But the oneg doesn't mean physical pleasures of life or mundane pleasures. It means supreme spiritual pleasures of oneness, achieving states of oneness with each other, with the cosmos, with what my hands are doing, whatever it might be the case. Everything we seek is inside this word oneg, no matter what it is. If we are lower order human beings who are acting in a very lower order way, then what we seek oneness is through common pleasures. Not that common pleasures are necessarily terrible, but common pleasures are a lower order than the higher pleasures that we're talking about. So that's oneg. The next one is ratzon, the next rung of the ladder. What's ratzon? Desire. I can only have a want or a desire once I've experienced an oneg and want to replicate it again. If I've had a state of oneg, a state of supreme pleasure or common pleasure, and I want it again. Common pleasure, I once tasted chocolate ice cream, I love it, I want to taste it again. So it becomes a motivational tool, I desire it. Or I've tasted states of absolute mystical oneness with the all, and I want to replicate it again. Okay, so whatever it is, that's part of Ratzon, desire. The next level is seichel, mind. You need to strategize in order to direct your desire in a direction which will get you states of oneg. If you don't strategize with your mind, you're not going to get there. On the other hand, mind alone, strategy alone is not going to get you there. You need to have fuel of energy. You need to be energized to do it, because you can academically, theoretically write as many papers as you want about what it is, but if you don't move your feet and try to do something about it, you're still not going to get there. So you need next level of emotion. And finally, you need the lowest level, which is body movement. Unless you move your body, it's unlikely that you'll get there and ever enjoy the pleasure at the top rung. So these are the levels. But no, desire is something which in Judaism is considered a very positive feature of our being. And egolessness is not a Jewish teaching, interestingly, in the following sense. A healthy sense of I is important. And that healthy sense of I we call self-esteem. Okay. What does low self-esteem cause if you lack it? So I've given you a couple of features there. If you have low self-esteem, the manifestations can result in depression, eating disorders, suicide, fatigue, back pain, and the habit of seeing everything worthless. If anyone can read that word, it's a very, very good word to be able to pronounce, isn't it?
Is the real word?
It's a real word, yes. Yes. Check it out. Consult Professor Google, and you'll see that this 20-letter word exists. Okay? But that's what you sort of see everything worthless, which is always almost a part of clinical depression at the same time.
Identification is easy, but the first part is...
So low self-esteem is not a good thing to be involved with. You must really elevate yourself and raise yourself. There's a very nice little statement. When you base self-esteem on externals, you're just renting it. In other words, if your self-esteem, quote unquote, that's not real self-esteem, is dependent on those things out there, as opposed to your neshama within here, then you're not going to ever have it. You may have it temporarily, you're renting it, but it's never part of you, in fact. And you become dependent on these things. So people can have tremendous wealth and still be very insecure and spend every week on the couch of a psychiatrist, etc. I mean, I told you of the instance of not long ago where I was counselling an individual who was in fact a billionaire here in Australia. And he lost about half of his assets. He only was worth about 500 million instead of $1 billion. And he cried like a baby. And he honestly felt that he was like without a roof over his head because he had lost half of his wealth. And he honestly felt that. I mean, we think it's ridiculous, but it's all relative. etc. So, if you base your self-esteem on externals, you'll never feel adequate.
Could you help him?
Did I help him? I hope I did, actually. He-
This one took another cup.
I wasn't a financial advisor, and I wasn't able to get him back his other $500 million, but nevertheless, he did improve, yes.
Could you have a temporary low self-esteem or
Look,
for certain reasons?
of course we're human beings and we're fallible and we can fail from time to time, obviously. But the point being, the more we can actually strengthen the positivities that we're talking about, the less likely that you'll come to those lower states. And that requires awareness, it requires mindfulness, it requires practice, it requires a Yom Kippur every year.
But I just find when you do have low self-esteem and you get depressed or don't have appetite and all these, what comes with it, most doctors send you off to the psychiatrist. And most of the time they end up, prescribing.
Okay, so
So it all gets masked.
it's possible. I mean, I don't want to go into details how different doctors advise differently, because there are many different doctors, they do advise differently, and some are better than others. So always go to a doctor that is well recommended to you. Page 3, yes.
So can I just
Yes,
ask,
Gabriel.
Where do like a person's accomplishments in life, where do they actually fit in the scale of things?
It depends what the accomplishment is. I mean, as in this particular instance, the accomplishment was that he had amassed a fortune of being a billionaire. But then, is that really the accomplishment that we're talking about? The accomplishment we're talking about that ultimately is of great value is your personal growth and development as a person, not what you take from the outside to fill you up because you feel inadequate. The spirituality. Envy and jealousy indicates you aren't in love with your inner persona, your soul, your uniqueness in the world. That's what we said earlier. You're not aware of that. You're not aware of how special you are. And when I say special, I don't mean to compensate for low self-esteem, but to honestly recognize that you have a gift. There's no reason for you to be alive if you don't have it. There's no reason for God to have brought you into the world unless you have something to offer. Otherwise, you'd be just a redundancy. And the divine accountant doesn't get it wrong. If you're here, it means you do count. And you do have something to give. That's very, very important. Your uniqueness. And you have to become aware of that. If you're envious and jealous, it means you don't believe in Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, or the purpose of Gilgul HaNefesh, reincarnation. What does that mean? It means that when something happens to you, and it's a little painful, or very painful, or not understandable, if you begin with the axiomatic proposition, it is purposeful nevertheless, and it's for my ultimate good, and no, that can't be proven, but also can't be disproven. So if you begin with that proposition, then you won't ever get into states of envy and jealousy. Everything happens purposefully. And the stance that I train people is neutral curiosity. Neutral curiosity means you stand back and you ask yourself the question, isn't this interesting? I wonder why it's happening. And no, you can't answer the question generally because it's too big for us. But when you adopt a stance of neutral curiosity, you won't fall into a state of envy and jealousy. If you do have occasions of envy and jealousy, it means you don't practice radical humility. You're not humble enough. And here I'm not talking about the Christian notion, but the Jewish notion of humility. Do you know the difference? Who is the epitome of humility in our tradition? Who is the paradigm of humility in the Torah? It happens to be close. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses. In fact, there's a verse in the Torah that says Moses was the most humble of all people, which
And
poses...
Torah. So there's an issue there, right?
What?
It's attributed that this was handed down to Moses at Mount Sinai. the
Yes,
Torah.
yeah.
So the fact that there appears such a light, that he was the most humble man who ever lived, whatever
Yes.
the exact wording, a little anomalous, shall we say, and
Only-
subject of some discussion amongst some.
Only if you say that he made it up, but he was writing a dictation exercise that God was dictating.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not him writing about himself. But anyway, let's not go into the philosophical dispute on that. Let's just ask ourselves the question, how is it possible that Moses is the epitome of humility? Because we understand his character to be something very, very different. He was a very strong, assertive, commanding individual, a chief justice, a general, an arbiter of all Jewish disputes. Can you think of a worse job than that? This was a very, very strong person. How can the Torah say, and this is the most humble of all people? It seems to be anomalous, doesn't it? So the Midrash comes to our rescue, and the Midrash explains it to us. The Midrash says, if Moshe Rabbeinu were asked, hey Moshe, how come you're such a great guy? He would have said, me, a great individual? If someone else were given the same gifts that God gave me, they would have done an even better job. Have a look. What was his answer? His answer was, I was given gifts. The reason I'm able to handle 600,000 families on the move is because those gifts are not of my making. They were given to me from above. And I'm not sure if I'm doing the best job either. Someone else might do an even better job. But to be a Moshe Rabbeinu, to know that you have gifts, you have to be strong and assertive with your gifts. Every one of us in this room must be assertive with our gifts. You're not allowed to practice false humility. You're not allowed to say, oh, not me, you do it, I can't do it. On the contrary, you have to say, Hashem has given me these gifts, now I will do so. Which goes to the core of the difference between being a controlling individual or an assertive individual. What's the difference between a controlling, dominating individual and an assertive individual? Control and domination is a sign of weakness. Control and domination means I have to make you be what I want you to be because I will be satisfied by that. I need you to be the way I want you to be. That's control and domination. And that's because of my inadequacy. Whereas assertiveness is even to use the same voice, even use the same sentence, but whatever I'm doing is for your benefit, not for mine. I may be wrong, that doesn't matter. But if I am strong assertively because my motivation is your welfare, that's called assertiveness. If it's control and domination because of my fears, then it's the opposite. A world of difference between control and assertiveness.
Where do you draw the line? Sometimes it's almost...
It's very simple. Are you doing it for the other or for yourself? Very easy line to draw.
How do you
Very
explain
easy.
to the other that it is for their, like, if you...
Why do you have to explain to the other?
Well,
You don't have to explain yourself.
okay, so...
Unless it's appropriate, unless it's reasonable.
If you honestly believe that you are doing it for their benefit, but what if they don't need what you believe that?
They don't. We're looking at your motivation, not the way they're responding.
As long as you believe that you are doing it not for yourself but for the other.
Then you should. Yeah. I mean, I'm not talking here about problem-solving techniques and how to win friends and influence people and how to be able to project yourself successfully. I'm not talking about tech. I'm talking about what's really inside you.
What motivates you.
Yeah, exactly. One is positive, one is negative. Okay. If you're envious, and jealous, you're breaking the 11th commandment, which is, thou shalt not compare. Because all envy and jealousy requires two, not one. It requires you to compare something about yourself with something outside of yourself or other. And of course, everything has its own particular divine mission. So you can't compare one person to another. Not at all. You should never want to be the other person. One of the unfortunate aspects of modern media and advertising is that it's influencing everyone to want to be what they're not. Image, etc. And that's very unhealthy. So what are the hallmarks of true humility? What might be some of the things that you experience if you're truly a humble person, which remember we're defining as being an assertive individual at the same time? Having awe for being a truly significant speck in an infinite universe. Yes, we are but a speck. But you know what? That speck is absolutely necessary for the universe to exist. In the same way that one letter in a Sefer Torah, if it's for some reason is either missing or is spoilt, renders the whole Sefer Torah not usable. I don't know if you've ever seen that Torah that's not usable, what happens is they tie it on the outside so it becomes recognized. You shouldn't read from that Torah until a sofer, a scribe, fixes it up. Similarly, one soul that isn't and should be renders the whole cosmos unusable. In other words, every speck counts. And even if you consider yourself humbly a speck, but you are a terribly important speck, and no other specks can exist without you. So it's nothing to do with size. It's got to do with fact of existence. Someone who's truly humble doesn't see themselves as the center of the universe, but God is the center of the universe, or the other. So that goes again to self-centeredness or ego-centeredness. A realization that each speck has its distinctive purpose, none better than the other, not comparing apples to oranges, as we've spoken earlier. You don't compare one person to another, because each person is significantly different. Knowing your gifts is important, but if you flaunt your gifts, what does that mean? It means you have an inadequacy, a word that was used on this side before. It means there's an insecurity. Somehow or other, there's something missing and you need to fill it up. So you need to project yourself. You have to raise your voice. You have to expand your chest. You have to make yourself recognized. Okay? Appreciating beauty in everything and everyone. And that's probably the best way to do it. You look at another person and you know that they possess a singular beauty which in no shape or form is comparable to anyone else in existence. And that's a beautiful way to look at people and to recognize them. And it's absolutely true. Each one of us is distinctly beautiful. Okay?
And you think also being non-judgmental a bit?
That's part of non-judgmentalism, sure. Absolutely. Now, it's a good point you raise, because we've taken this term, which again derives from another spiritual tradition of being non-judgmental, and we sort of always elevate that as being a really important axiom of life. Is it the same as not judging? Maybe. If someone, to use your example, commits murder, are we not allowed to say that's wrong? And are you not being judgmental? And no one in this room would in any way say, no, that's incorrect. Murder is wrong. I should be judgmental about it. So the idea of being purely non-judgmental really doesn't work. So what do we usually mean about not being being non-judgmental? It's not a term that derives from our Western thinking, but from Eastern thinking. What does that really mean? Not looking in the flaws in people. Good. We all like the term of being non-judgmental. When we come to analyse it, we're not quite sure what that means.
So we're all of the same stuff orientally, and we're all of the same stuff, and whatever is in you is in me.
That's good. That's very good. But what if you misbehave? Am I not allowed to recognise that and say that?
You are.
Isn't that being judgmental?
Yes.
So non-judgmental, being absolutely non-judgmental doesn't really work.
Otherwise you don't care.
Yeah.
Maybe if you recognise that's not our role.
Yes. Usually I think we use the term not to be judgmental as a personality trait. There are individuals that constantly see flaws in someone else, as you said, so they have a sort of judgmental personality. So that's the way I think we conventionally use the term non-judgmental. But I don't think it applies literally, accurately. We always have to have a sense of values and measure ourselves against other people in that respect. So, having said that, doesn't that contradict what we said before, that everyone possesses a uniqueness and a beauty? How do the two go together? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave a very, very good example. He was asked, how's it possible for us to love someone who really, really is an unlikable person? And there's an absolute duty to love each other. So how do you love someone who's very unlikable? So he says there's a positive and negative side in everyone. There's a nefesh elokit and there's a nefesh bahamit. You can dislike their nefesh bahamit, their lower order self, but you love the nefesh elokit, the higher order self that is latent in that person. So you can always relate to something positive in that person. So I think it's close to what you said before, which is not to look at the flaws of the person, but to recognize the positive features of an individual in terms of relationship building. If you see the flaws in somebody, it's important to do something about it. Whether it's subtle, whether it's slow, whether it's tactful or otherwise, that's to do with your strategizing. But the fact, and it's another teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, what our eyes see has been deliberately put into the vision in order for us to rectify and fix. Otherwise, you wouldn't be party to seeing it. If you see a flaw, you have to...
What about domestic violence?
Yes.
Well, how can you love that? What do you say about that?
Oh, I can fully understand the pain.
Loving another person.
Yeah. So what the Rebbe says, you love whatever was good in the other person. I mean, it's very, very hard. And it doesn't mean that you have to therefore accept the other person into your life. In fact, you may make a very deliberate decision to separate and divorce because the overwhelming preponderance of the other person isn't that very likable aspect. But you married that person because at some stage you witnessed it. You saw something good about the person. The fact that you later found out about all these other things in that person, that's not great. I agree with you. And therefore separation and divorce is, within the Jewish system, a very, very real thing.
But you spoke about loving the other person despite their faults.
No, not loving them despite the faults, loving their lovable part. And hating their faulty part. But hating it meaning in the sense of wanting to rectify it. And you may not be able to do so. Remember, it's not our job to fix the world. It's our job to fix the problem that comes into our vision, our capacity. And you have to deal with what is within your reach, not what is not within your reach. So, affirmation practices as antidotes. How do you want to train to get rid of envy and jealousy? How do you reaffirm self-esteem? One way is what I said earlier to you. Practice the Modeh Ani meditation every morning. And practice it in a way that you don't just rattle it off, but you actually spend 2, 3, 4 minutes internalizing the idea, Shechechazarta binishmasi, you, Hashem, have restored to me my uniqueness this morning. Therefore, the rest of the day, I'm going to share it with the world. Another good little practice is to smile in the mirror for 30 seconds in the morning. It's a very long time, 30 seconds. If you try smiling for 30 seconds, it's a very, very long time. In fact, I'll time you. Would you please look at each other and smile? I'll tell you when 30 seconds start. Now. And I'll tell you when they finish. Smile does not mean speak. You're only 30% of the way through. That's 30 seconds. Wow, isn't that a long time? Okay. So when I say to people, smile in the mirror for 30 seconds, what's that, 30 seconds? 30 seconds each morning, 7 days a week, onwards and onwards for 120 years, is a very, very good way to influence yourself. You relate, by the way, best to your own smile, better than even other people's smile. So that's another very positive practice.
You might feel better about yourself if you actually smile.
You might feel
better about yourself.
Oh, that's the purpose, is to start recognizing how really you have these positive virtues which comes out in a smile. Be mindful when things aren't going exactly your way. Recognize them, acknowledge them, and have the sense of accomplishment of turning them around, working with them, changing them. You have the ability. Be happy. I think you said over here to be happy, right? So the Pirkei Avos, the section of the Mishnah, a very special section of the Mishnah that deals with wisdom teachings of the ancient ones, says, who is the truly happy individual? The one who's happy in their lot. In other words, you're happy when you realize you are given everything that you need to be given at any one time. Tomorrow you may be given more, you may be given less, and that's okay too. Avoid the wah-wah attitude. What's that? That's what a baby says. Wah, 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 wah. It means I want, right? A baby is born to want, because the baby's mind isn't yet developed. It doesn't have sophistication. It's working purely emotionally, and it recognizes its dependency and its insecurity, and therefore constantly wants everything and everything around. I want what I want when I want it. How many people do you know that are big babies, therefore? I want it now. You know what maturity means? Maturity means that you actually become bar and bat mitzvah. And maturity means what? Maturity means that you stop being an I want machine. Unfortunately, what's happened in our society is that the I want machine continues. It's just that what I want becomes more sophisticated presence. It's no longer I want your doll or I want your train set. It's I want your house, I want your wife, and I want your assets, right? But it's still the same exact baby attitude. There's no difference whatsoever. Still stark immaturity. No difference whatsoever. And if I don't get it, I'll let everyone know loudly, as babies tend to do. Do you know anyone like that? And I'll be envious whoever gets it first. All right. So, although it's something that we tend to tolerate, there's a tendency in contemporary society to more or less make peace with people's faults and make peace with your own faults. In fact, the terminology, you must practice acceptance. We don't practice acceptance in Judaism. We practice acknowledgement. That's different than acceptance. Acceptance is the lazy way of saying, I don't want to do anything about it. But it's a very, very sophisticated and almost Eastern way practice acceptance. No, you don't accept, because you are a gift that has to be given and contributed to everyone around you who's put into your ambit and into your orbit. You've got to create change in the world, and only you have the ability to create change in the world the way that you can do so. And you don't accept things around you that there shouldn't be. You don't accept injustice. You don't accept people being pained. You have to acknowledge it. You have to recognize it. In other words, you don't turn your eyes away from it, but you don't accept it. Okay? So there's a very big difference between, in our tradition, between the notions of acceptance and acknowledgement. Have we exhausted the subject sufficiently this evening? I don't doubt it very much, but at least to give us beginning points for self-analysis and to look at ourselves. And next time you fall into a tendency of saying, I wish I had that, you just remember that session with Laibl. And what does it mean when I say, I wish I had that? What you're saying is you're selling yourself short. You have it and more, because you are you. Do you remember that nice little, I'll finish with the nice little teaching of the Kotzker Rebbe, which I'm so fond of saying. Have you heard me repeat it here? The Kotzker said, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not I, and you are not you. But if I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, then I am I, and you are you, and we can get on very well, thank you. Now, I know that having said that does not for one moment mean that you've taken it in. So let me give it a little bit of an interpretation. If I am I because you are you, I don't have a sense of my identity. I'm just a reflection of you. And you are you because I am I. And you also don't have a sense of yourself. You're simply an echo of me. Then I am not I, and you are not you. You can't have a relationship and get on under those circumstances because you don't respect yourself. But if I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, each one of us recognizes our own inner being, then I am I, whole person, you are you, whole person, and then we can get along and not be envious, not be jealous, and have the profoundest learning experience from each other. That's how the Kotzker summarized this whole class, which took me 1 hour and took him probably less than 60 seconds. And that's why he was a master and I struggled. Have a good evening.